Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Streaming Alchemy Show. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we have a special guest. This is Jeffrey Fitzgerald from Jeff and High Def. He's an industry veteran and has a lot to share with us about, not just the history of the production space, but a lot of the innovations and how that can impact what we're going to be able to do moving forward. So before we get to talking with Jeffrey, uh, I just want to remind everyone that we do take video call in for the show. So please, and on the URL below, if you click and connect, we can get you on air. Ask Jeff a question if you'd like, or just say hello and share an experience. All of that would be welcome, as well as anything you'd like to share in the comments. We love engagement. And we love to have you as part of the community. So you know, let's feel free to jump in. So why don't we get started? I'd like to welcome Jeffrey Fitzgerald to the show. Jeff, how are you?
Mm. Hey, it is always awesome to catch up with John Mahoney, and this is my first time being on your show. And got to tell you, I've been excited all week about being here today.
So I mean, we've been pretty excited too. This every time we get a chance to talk, it's always engaging for me. So I think there's a lot of people are gonna get something from this and from the experience that you've been bringing to this space now for many years. So as a start, why don't you just share a bit of your background and experience? Because I think that sets a good context for.
Sure. Yeah. I kind of come from a different world in some ways versus a lot of the content creators that are making great waves on the internet today. I was the son of a veteran television producer who in the 70s was producing early documentaries, ended up doing a number of shows that aired nationally on PBS network in the early 1980s, shows on things like Rye syndrome, which was a medical disease we know about today that's very common. My mom's first show on that in 1980 was credited with a viewership of 32 million people, which was amazing at that time.
Wow.
But then there was only three or four networks, and obviously it was easier to do that. But so I tagged along with her everywhere from being 7 years old at WAVA radio in DC. She worked at WTOP News at the time, moved between some of the DC stations in the 70s. And I was kind of always with her just because I loved TV and learned a lot by just observation and analysis. So I was really blessed to have a really good, firm understanding of what TV could look like. And been in the 1980s as a 20 something, a late teen, early 20 something. I found a computer called the Amiga computer, and I began doing a lot of computer graphics and really got excited about what could be done with that. And while it was primitive by today's standards, it was really earth shattering in the world of video production. And 1988, I bought John a $12,000 VHS editing system, which was is amazing to think about today. That's what you would spend for something like that. From there, I moved on, growing my computer graphics. I got into 3D animation at that time, and in the mid '90s, shot a lot of her documentary work, Betacam operator. And then 1994 rolls around, and I hear about this thing called the World Wide Web, and I'm like, "Oh, this is going to be big. This is going to be really cool." And I shifted a lot of my work toward full time working in web development, web programming, that kind of thing. But I always loved video, and video was always part of that with me. And so throughout the 90s, working in the online space, it always included, in one form or another, what video could look like as it became more popular from going from real audio in there like 1996, 97 to when it first hit with the 3 frames per second posted size video. We knew it wasn't something that we could do immediately, but it began to be, after the 2000 milestone in 2000, 2001, it began to be a little bit more ubiquitous. I was hired to build an online university for the world's largest ISP, UUNet, which I absolutely love to this day. And from there, it went into 2005, launching a medical video channel for the American College of Cardiology. And then in 2010, after that, I became senior producer of a Washington, D.C. public policy, biotech, and healthcare program, airing on 32 PBS stations nationally and the CBS affiliate in D.C. And we did 224 shows and covered everything from the most common diseases we know about, all the way to the things that are so rare people don't even know about them and know what to do about them. We brought the government, the academia community, the patient voice in there, and we had a really great forum for being able to tell the story of the patient and how to deal with a lot of the trouble that we have with getting medicine to market. And so that was a really unique experience for me. I worked 5 years out of the TV station, and at that point, when the show sunsetted in 2015, I started my own media company, something I'd been wanting to do for years. And the last 4 years, I've been running Jeff and High Def, doing a lot of media consulting, a lot of marketing promotions. I do PSAs and a lot of live stream work. I do just as much online work as I do anything else. And it's been a really wonderfully terrifying 4 years, because as an entrepreneur, you learn as you go, and sometimes you hit big home runs, and there's challenges in the middle of it. But one thing that has not changed throughout is that video is the magic pill if you want to get known and you want to get seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think from what you're saying, it's one of the key things for anything in production is telling a story, having a message, communicating at some level. And I think sometimes, especially today, we can get lost in the technical side of things and forget that the ultimate intent is some level of engagement, moving somebody's position, making them think differently about a subject, or just informing them about something that they should know about but don't.
Absolutely. One of the things that I think that people make the mistake of so often, and I've used this example before. We've got our nifty, iPhone XR, whatever the new model is, the three lens iPhone 11, and you say, "Hey, I'm a content creator now. I'm a video producer," and there's absolute truth in that. You do have the wonderful ability to tell a new story with that. But where people, I think, fail, if that's the right word, is that they confuse the technology with the technique, and the shiny object of whatever that new feature is, the new sticker you can put on a video, with how to tell a really cool story. And we live by stories. And while many talk about the demise of TV, the reality is that we've all learned how to tell stories from TV. And I think that whether you're using an iPhone or using a full studio, there's a knack and a formula for telling a story that people want to hear, a way to attract them, to get them hooked early, to talk about the arc of the champion, the challenge, the dark valley that they're going to be in, and then showing your story, whether it's your brand or your service or you, or the story that you're in, how that you've moved forward. Even if the answers are not final, it's where do we go from here. And so storytelling is a massive art. I've never claimed to be the best at it, but at the same time, I know that stories are everything. That's what our entire being, our relationships are built on. And so if we can tell a good story, we go a long way in telling that message to the world about our brand, our product, or our service.
Yeah. I think that sometimes there's a tendency to think that storytelling is in the realm of the fictional and it's not, and then there's reality TV. I mean, you have these, dichotomies where a lot more TV is quote unquote reality, but it's still scripted. It still tries to promote a story arc and have heroes and
That's right.
challenges and everything else. So, to your point, it is something where you need to understand those narrative tools in order to be successful, even in news reporting or in documentary
That's
work
right.
where you're talking about something that is very factual. You have to have that something that somebody can connect with, can share as a
Yeah.
bonded experience.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be connected to your story. You can't tell someone else's story in nearly the same way you can if you're part of it. Now, if you're a journalist and it is a story that you're working, that presents a different challenge, but it's nonetheless that, what do you do there? You go in and you get yourself embedded and learn the story from the firsthand experience of the people who were there, learn what the dynamics were at play. How does a story morph over time? What are the real challenges with bringing that story to light? Are there parts of that story that haven't been discovered yet? And so that's where you put that investigative journalist hat on, and you figure out that, hey, this is maybe what they're saying is happening, but way down here there's something that's creating all of that trouble. And so it's a situation where the narrative is everything in storytelling. And so if you are going to tell a story that is going to be potent and compelling and passionate, you've got to be able to do it in a way that is going to connect with the people that are going to listen to it. And so you can't speak over someone, you can't be abstract about it. We know a lot of times you hear this in editing and video editing, that emotion is everything. It's communicating through the art of what music you play and those things. But if we're talking about news, that's a different thing. You don't have the ability to massage that as much. But when you're talking about, your own product, your own service, especially if you're building marketing material, that's where emotion can have a major impact on it. But no matter what, whether it's within news and journalism or whether it's within marketing and media, emotion is what we connect on, and that's the relational component of any story. And so, we use these fancy words all the time, like brand and content and narrative and value, but it's really true. You've got to know the people you're speaking to, and you want to tell them a story that's going to sometimes make them feel good, but maybe sometimes not make them feel good. Maybe you want them to be a little angry or understand that there's something they can do to make the world a better place. And there's room for both in the material that you put together. It's really, what is your goal, but being true to the story is going to be number one no matter what you do.
Yep. I mean, it's funny because when I was growing up, news was something that was sort of a half hour at night for the national news and a half hour for your local news. And that was it. And now that we have 24-hour news and so many different avenues for news, you would think that there'd be a natural inclination for people to go deep, to sort of tell the stories within the stories. But you're not really seeing that necessarily in a lot of the content that is produced today. It tends to still take that, you know, 2-inch deep, 5-mile wide view of, telling a what are many times very important stories that need to get told.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, no matter what we're hearing, no matter what side you are on the political landscape, there is a deeper story and there's a bigger story than what's being told, because we've moved into this era where Twitter sound bites are everything. And so both sides, if you want to call it the Republican Democratic dilemma, uh, anyone on either side of a story, they know that they don't have the ability to sit and have America listen for an hour as to, this is really what happened and this is why I did what I did, or why I thought this would work. And so because you've got this kind of soundbite cage around people, um, the news cycle has changed as well, and it takes full advantage of that because um, back in the day, like you said, when it was Walter Cronkite at 7 p.m. and it was a half hour, it was very much, I'm going to present you the facts as we know them. This is what we've heard. We're not going to put the 360 on it. We're not going to put the angle on it. We're going to put it out there and let you kind of think about it. But in the world of cable news from 1980, with Bernie Shaw and CNN, at that time, I major fan of CNN. And you look at where we are today. Now we've got a lot of journalists who are branded, which is not a bad thing in and of itself. But I personally think a lot of times that creates competition within even the TV community, because you want to be the one out there hitting the big story every night. You want to be out there the one catching the president in his evil act, whether he's a Republican or a Democrat. And so that, plus the fact that we now have 24 hours to talk about it, but we're not going to go deep with it, creates a real interesting situation, because now the people who were interviewed, journalism is very strong no matter what. I definitely don't accept the president's assumption that somehow journalism is fake news across the board, and that it's journalism is out to get him per se. But when you look at where we're at with the way things are structured, many times you're going to see contributors to a conversation that really are third party as anybody else. It's interviewing another journalist about a story. You're interviewing somebody that's got a perspective on it, but they're brought in as a network contributor, but they're not anybody that has any more information than anybody else. So what happens is, what little information is shared or understood is now kind of regurgitated for 24 hours or for 20 minutes or for 2 minutes. And it ends up being a situation where I think that we're missing an incredible opportunity to really do the world a favor, certainly the viewers in America a favor, by telling them more than maybe what we think they need to know. Instead of spoon feeding, give a bigger platter of things to learn about, and then use social media to find out what's important to them and create stories that will resonate in the parts of that story where maybe they would like to know more.
Yeah, I mean, it's the interesting contrast in some ways is almost to how you would translate a book into a movie, where what you're pruning it down from something that can be very deep and rich and immersive into something that can fit into something that's a commercial package, two
That's right.
hours or less. And
That's right.
it's so interesting to me that we've expanded the amount of time we have, but we're not changing the way we're using that time. We're simply doing iterations of 20-minute news cycles.
That's
And
right.
so we don't really necessarily leverage as, storytellers, the full potential that's out there, for us to do this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and in all fairness, too, certainly, the work that journalists are doing in the news cycle is absolutely demanding, and it is hard enough to do what's being done. So there's no knock, on that side of things. I think, if it were me, I think that maybe you commit a month, 2 months, maybe to an ongoing story, and so it may not be more than 20 minutes as normal for one particular show, but you're going to come back to it, and I think that there's also a dynamic at play now where we're all getting worn out with the same story being promoted. One side of a political landscape has a problem with some things, the other side does, and it's one portion of people are hearing the same thing over and over again, and the other side's hearing their version of it over and over again. And what happens is we all want to watch the World Series, and nothing on the national landscape is really benefiting from that. And so again, I really believe that for the journalists that I know, there is a lot of good being done, and it is important to hold our government accountable. That's absolutely the way it works. I don't care if the person that's in there right now or anybody after him likes it. That's how it works. We hold our government accountable. But I think that what's happening is between kind of the self generated interest in, I want to create my show rather than it being about maybe a particular topic or
Right.
a particular conversation that goes on and on. I think maybe there's more we can do in that area to bring deeper parts of the narrative at a national level out to more people. But again, I mean, that's just kind of how I see it. I think we're in a moment where social media has made it where we all want to be the superstar instead of really figuring out how together we can tell a bigger story.
But while we tend to think about journalism at this macro sort of big national news level as streamers, so the people that we would normally be reaching in a show like this, you actually have a lot more that you can be doing on a local level. So it's the types of things where you're covering not just local events, but things that impact your local community and that people need to be aware of. So I think these are things that we can think about and put into practice. It's like right in our own backyard. These are not things that are, well, those are the big journalists and they have to sort of sort through this. This is a challenge for everybody trying to tell a story, especially with a news orientation.
Yes, and I think where the salvation of uh, maybe journalism and the country come back together again, because at the local level people are not nearly as competitive in terms of trying to push for one angle or another. Most people at the local level are really good people, and they are trying to do good things. And so if you're a local producer, if you're someone who's wanting to do video, if you're looking to do live stream, this is a great place to get involved in your community and help the community as a whole understand what the takeaways are. I mean, we've got elections in my county coming up here in 2 weeks, and I've been doing some of the live streams for the county debates, and it's incredibly powerful. And for me, I've had this happen in TV before. I would be in a drugstore or something. I hear somebody mention something that ended up being, "Hey, that was on my show." I was in my local diner here. I live in a small town at the base of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and our diner is what you would see in anything from Stranger Things to Andy Griffith. It's the locals, and you don't mess with the back table. That's where they are. And I'm only middle level right now, being here 6 years. Um, but a nice gentleman was speaking with someone else, and I was waiting to pick up some food uh, about a week ago, and he said, he says, I wanted to go to that debate, but they live streamed it. And I'm thinking, I didn't think this guy could work a telephone, right? Because you don't think you stereotype people wrongly, and so I'm definitely guilty of that. And this gentleman in his overalls and all, he says, but they live streamed it, and I loved it, and I felt like I was part of that conversation. And he went on for 10 minutes to talk about all of the things that the three candidates had said, and it was the first time I realized that what we do online really has an effect in the lives of people. And so if you're thinking about how do you want to motivate change on a particular topic or conversation, it is going to be with video, and it's going to be in a way that connects with people like that, where they're empowered now. And so that's where the beauty of what we're doing really comes into play.
Yeah, there's a lot that's evolved, though. I mean, so we've talked sort of the needs for things that probably have evolved in the wrong direction in terms of the approach to creating content and sort of telling a story. But the technology is fundamentally changing the way we can tell stories. Sort of the ability we have to connect at different levels with people, and not only that, but to also offer services to people in cost-effective ways. Because I think that one of the challenges in the past was that media was an expensive avenue for most people to take. And so, we didn't have a way that we could easily get people on TV or share stories. But now we do. It's really changed for a lot of people that are looking to get involved at the local level or to do advocacy for things that they're really passionate about or that matter to them.
That's right. Yeah, and it's an interesting moment we live in. When I whether I worked at some of these other vocational positions that I talked about, I always had a studio at my house going on maybe 25 years now. And I used to think that I was kind of jerry rigging everything. I had my green screen up, in 1999, and I'm trying to figure out how to do it with mini DV, which didn't sample very well, and all these kind of things. And I would think about, the TV stations, how cool it was that they had all the big tools and things. And I had an eye-opening experience happen when I went to the TV station in DC in 2010. My first week there, I was going to Capitol Hill to for us to interview Bart Stupak, one of the congressmen. And I said, "Hey, I need a camera," and they go, "Yeah, we got you covered." And I'm used to the cameras I worked with. Beta cams were 3 foot long, and they were 40 pounds or whatever it was, 20 pounds, and I like the knobs and everything. And they handed me this little Sony Palm camera, and I was like, "Okay, that's really funny. Okay, but I'm on to you. You're just playing with me." And they go, "No, that's what you're using." And I very reluctantly took it, and I used it, and found that while it wasn't everything I wanted it to be, it was certainly more than good enough. And I had to learn, and as I learned, it got better. And my 5 years over the time from when my show started to when I ended, everything went more miniature, more concise, with having the ability to do a lot more for us than things we would have to do on our own. Back in the day, they would send three people on a new show in the 80s and 90s. When they would go out on a story, there would be a producer or a reporter, and there would be the sound guy and the video guy. And these days, they call them MMJs, multimedia journalists, and they go out, they do their own stand-ups, they flip the little viewfinder over so they can see what they're going to, look like, and they sit there and they repeat it and they get it down, and then they do their interview, and they shoot their own B-roll. Then they go back to the studio and they put it in the edit system, and they cut their own story. Then they record their own voiceover over top of that, and then they encode it, and then they send it into the system for error. And so the steps have gotten um, less than what they were before, but at the same time, the potency has gone up immensely. And even when I left in 2015, like I said, multiple journalists were beginning to use their phones for live streaming, and snowstorms would come around, and you'd have the guy in the snow truck going down the road, and he's showing what it looks like, and where it's heavy and things like that. And these days, this is what it looks like. it's been, I think, the biggest challenge for people who've worked in traditional television or video, especially when you get to be the ages that we are in our generation. You end up thinking that something's wrong with that. But if you can embrace the awkward and step into really giving it a fair shot, even if it's not the way you want to do it, you'll find some beauty in the technology that will work for you, and you'll find you've got a whole new world available to you to be able to communicate on great platforms. We know of what the big four are:
Yep.
Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And of course, there's Instagram, Snapchat, and we can all debate on which ones are the top five. But the reality is, you have an antenna you've never had before, and it is an incredible time to be able to tell your story. And if you can do it in a way that really connects with people, you're home free. You're well on your way to getting what you're looking for.
I mean, the funny thing is the camera that you have in your phone is really like an OB van. I mean, today you have the ability to stream it to you can send it RTMP out to a bigger studio, all from your camera and all from your phone. And so you're really in a position now where that's the camera you always have. So, in journalism,
Yeah,
I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, the best photo is the photo with the camera you got right there. It's not the camera you left at the
that's right.
office or, and this gives you that ability now for in the moment, the ability to jump on and report. And with
It
things like
does, and it
live view and that sort of extends that even further in the professional space.
It really does. And it's funny because it's also creating a world of citizen journalists, isn't it? I mean, if you really watch YouTube and you watch a lot of the other platforms with people creating content, there's no magic to it. It's just learning it, watching other people, doing it yourself. You start off, it's going to suck. You work until it's better, and people are really really good at picking up on their own how to be great storytellers, how to be great citizen journalists. And these days, when a story breaks in California with a wildfire, or there's some sort of a high speed chase, or there's something where someone's there with a mobile phone and a live stream, the news stations are getting that information at the exact same moment that you are. And it has created a dynamic that didn't always exist, because it used to be everything funneled through the big three or the local news, and then they're the ones that disseminate it, and they present it to the community, the audience that's watching. And these days, it's now where everybody's on an equal playing field. And so that makes it really good and really bad, because now there's so many more people out there. If you want to stand out, you've got to find a way to do something that's going to get you noticed and get you seen. But it's an amazing moment with technology for sure.
Well, when you think about this, then with the citizen journalist, uh, what now distinguishes the professional from sort of the amateur or the citizen videographer, journalist, storyteller?
It's a big difference, and it really comes down to, for me, what I really believe is that you have to have a foundation of understanding the balance of being able to tell a story that you may or may not agree with, because many people today get empowered and motivated with their phone and their camera, because they want to stop a plant that's going to be toxic from moving into their neighborhood. We've got that particular dilemma here locally. Great reasons for getting involved in advocacy media, but if you're not careful, you tell a story that is completely one-sided. And to me, that's not journalism. That is not the way we share. We have to be able to disagree with people, but yet let them have a voice. And that doesn't necessarily mean, if you're trying to stop a toxic plant coming in, that you want to go up and give the guy a microphone and say, "Hey, tell me why we should do this." But at the same time, maybe you should. You give people a chance to speak. You learn how to tell a story that's balanced, because at the end of the day, if you're doing it the right way, the story will tell itself, and it will motivate and change people to move the needle in a direction that hopefully you want to see it moved in. I think there's too much hate in citizen journalism and just in social media in general. It's, obviously, this, we're in an era where you can't disagree with anybody. You can't say, "Hey, I really do love you, and I mean it. I'd give you a hug, but I don't agree with every single thing you do at 100%." And we're in a moment now where, no matter what you are, where you are on the political or any other spectrum, that if you disagree with it, it becomes a real challenge to be respected, because now there's names being thrown and things like that. So I think with citizen journalism, the biggest thing is, if you're going to learn to tell stories, Number one, you've got to put the hard work in that any journalist does. You've got to research the information, not just what you think the story parts are, but what are the bigger components? Why did people make decisions that they made? Are there other players in the background? That's where your investigative part of that comes in, looking for, follow the money. That's the number one thing you hear all the time in investigative news. Are you really doing a service to the bigger body of the conversation, or are you basically just presenting a view that is predictable and it's one sided and it's shallow. You don't want to be shallow. I think that if you're strong in what you're doing, your story will stand and hold. And I think that's the probably the biggest difference by far is we've got way too many people now that are trying to do their own version of news. And that's why we're seeing terms like fake TV come along because it's easily recognizable that it's got an agenda behind it. And news should never have an agenda behind it.
So we're really talking about three legs to this stool. One is the objectivity, things that come into your ability to see the context in the deeper picture. The other is technique. How do you translate that into a compelling narrative that people have an interest to listen through so you can get the value of what you uncover sort of from the reporting and hard work side into people in a way that they connect with it. And then there's ultimately the last one is the technical technique. How do you get the sound right? How do you get the video to look right? How do you frame and mix B-roll with live shots and other things? So there's sort of three elements to this, and what's really changed more than anything is just that third element. So even though we look at evolution in the big picture and think things are changed completely, those first two legs of the stool are pretty much the same legs that you needed 25 years ago.
That's right. Yeah, it is. And the difference between 25 or 30 years ago and today is that there are thousands of people who are creating content that have not been exposed to modeling of better storytellers and journalists. They've not been pushed through a system that will teach you how to think in equal balance, and things like that. And so a lot of people are self-taught. Like I said, they get motivated by a good story that's important to them. It may be, making the neighborhood safer, and they don't think that the government's doing enough, and those kind of things. Holding our public safety police and people like that may be more accountable if there's issues in a particular community. But no matter how it's cut up, really it comes down to the difference between then and now is that everybody literally, this, like I said, you pick this up, now you feel like you're empowered. I don't have to answer to anybody. I can say what I want. And I think that's dangerous in some ways, that you really want to make sure that if you're really trying to tell a story that's about others, you want to make sure that you're doing a service to them, even if you don't agree with them, to make sure that everything is, like you said, that it's objective and that there's an opportunity for, unbiased commentary. And certainly you can make your case strong even with those things. I don't think you have to let them go to be able to tell a bigger story, and propose why it's good that maybe we don't open this plant that will put 300 tons of pollution in the air a year.
Yeah.
That's a fact that we don't have to argue on. But yet, when you say that, it has very strong meaning. And so, I think there's a way to do it. And as people, come online, hopefully that the schools will, in some ways, pick up on maybe is we'd hope back in the day of the newspaper club.
Yep.
There's maybe a journalism club that will help with some of these things in some level. But it's sometimes it's a problem, but it's also been one of the greatest things to happen in the history of the country, where people now have a voice at every level and they can tell that to people.
Yeah. So when you think about that, you're also there's two different levels. One is the sort of the civic responsibility. I'm engaging because it's something that it's a story that needs to be told. But then there's another dimension where there's a commercial aspect to this. I mean, we see that in the newspaper industry, where you have local papers and even some fairly large national papers undergoing huge transformations. How do you, as a professional video producer, survive in this sort of hybrid, mixed up world of sort of amateur advocacy and professional but tight budget, you know, sort of journalism storytelling?
I think it's moved from tight budget to no budget because there's a perception in this world right now that I see all over the place with my work and different proposals and people that I'm trying to attract and I have conversations with. There's a perspective that a perception that says if we have the ability to record it on our own, that somehow that lessens the value for anybody else, and that maybe it shouldn't be more than 12 or 20 or $100 or $500 or maybe 1,000 at the most, whatever that
Yep.
looks like. But the reality really is in this moment that again, you're confusing technology with the technique of telling a story. If I can tell your story for you in a minute or a minute and a half or 30 seconds, that will literally move the needle for the product or the service that you're trying to present to the world. And you're going to do it and spend what you think are less spend less on a budget for that, but you're struggling with it. So you go week after week, month after month, putting videos out there, but nobody's paying any attention to them. And how much was your hourly rate again? You're losing time when you could be doing something that's much more valuable to you. Um, you end up finding that, and I get this all the time. People calling me all the time saying, "Hey, we've tried that. I had a gentleman last week. We've bought our own gear. We've hired the high school kid. We've hired the college kid, and in his particular case, John, they won't pay attention. It's a 2-hour presentation. He says within 10 minutes they're on their phones on Facebook while they're working the camera. Little bit of a problem there. So the reality is that if you're really going to look at what cost looks like, or you're going to look at what value looks like, you need to again, just like with we were talking about with the story. What's that story? You've got to look at all of the components. Is it better to invest in something that has a longer shelf life, that is much more dynamic and visual, that has the ability to really grab somebody? Because I say this a lot. We compete with every video above us and below us in the timeline. But when you're a content creator, what you do is you look left and you go, "Oh, Bob's in insurance like I am, and this is what he's doing, but I'm doing something a little bit better because I've got a ring light. And Sally's pretty good at insurance, but I know how to hold up my poster and not get the light in it and things." And nobody's thinking about what the message is. Message has to be there, or you might as well give it up. And so the reality is that there's always a cost, and you've got to figure out what you're paying, whether it's through your time or your money, or it's through lost opportunities. And there's absolutely a place for people doing their own media. What I do for the clients I work with is I actually will take them and teach them how to do themselves, how to be better, how to get that camera framed up where you're nice and composed with good lighting on an iPhone and with a microphone that plugs into it, how to tell your story natively if you're using a selfie stick, what kind of b-roll might work in that setting. But then what I do is I do the part they can't do, which is that more polished media that has that marketing look to it. It's got a lot more vibe and message and tone in it. And both are very important and very valuable because without one, only the media that I produce on one end would be, well, they're not authentic. We don't see what they look like in their daily life. But without the other part of it, they look like everybody else. And there's no difference in what you're seeing from them. So having a really strong media strategy that includes top down, high polished media at times, and certainly stronger messages that are ongoing through the week. And then in the middle of that, you're learning how to really be good with your camera and your own camera presentation. That's a potent script for being able to move past anybody that's a competitor, because now you're hitting areas that not everybody's hitting.
But it's communicating that's
It
probably
is.
for everybody in this space, that's probably the biggest challenge. How do I
It is.
get people to see that difference and not to look at it as what's the size of the check I'm writing Friday, but more what's the ROI that's going to pay off over the next 3 months for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And and listen, we've had on my side, we've had to move more toward quantity as well as maintaining quality, because I used to say, a couple years ago, it was, do you want quantity because you can do your own thing, or do you want quality? But the reality is that we all know now one video is not going to work. Um, it's a campaign. It has to be a campaign, and it usually that was really kind of the way it's been all along. But people would always want to say, let's just start with one and see what happens. But um, the shelf life of a strong video um, can only be on Facebook for so long during a week, or a month before it gets to be old. You got to pull it down and maybe put it up again in a couple months. But you want to switch out that kind of content and keep people thinking about you front of mind in different ways through testimonies or product value showcases, case studies themselves. Value proposition has got to be there no matter what you're doing. But it's a it's a situation where content creators at my level now are basically, we've expanded the offering to say, hey, instead of let's just doing you one video here for this price, we've, for me, I've rescoped to figure out how can I add more value and not necessarily raise the cost too much, and say, hey, let's do a 5 video campaign instead of a 1 video campaign. And now you've got something that you can put out there every week for the next 5 weeks. You can boost it on Facebook. It may be a longer video that you can use on your website, but we're going to pull these clips out that talk about you, and how you really, the patio you put in really was wonderful with the fire pit put in, and it's got, these wonderful pieces of art around it. Whatever you do, right? And now you've got the ability to have some punch to what you're trying to get out there, because it stands out, and people, even your competitors, are going to notice it. And it's worked really well for the people that I've worked with.
One of the things I found really interesting just in this industry is that people sell the technical capabilities when they're trying to package. If they do streaming and video production, they sell, I got these cameras, I got these lights, we got the soundboard, and they're sort of promoting my technical capabilities.
Hmm.
But to your point, it really comes down to what is it that the person that would be buying your services really wants to do? It's not a video in the abstract. It's not, there is a goal behind this, there's an intention behind it. And finding a way, for instance, one of the things I've talked to some folks about is they were looking for different ways to engage with the colleges around them to see if they could get video production services sold. And the challenge was they're competing against all the students and everybody there that's sort of doing it for free. But we ultimately ended up talking about packaging it around things like alumni donations and engagement with the sports teams and other types of metrics that matter to the universities they were dealing with. And it really created a different thought process around how do you package what you do? How do you move away? The person who would put in your patio doesn't package the technical skills around bricklaying or doing
That's right.
lighting, but they show you pictures of what you want and they get you to see that because that sort of connects with you. So I mean, I think that's a big part of this too. It's that we have to stop being so enamored with the technology as an endpoint and just see it as the start point for something else.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I've got an example here I'll share in a moment. But I've always said that back in the day when Alexander Graham Bell discovered the telephone and knew it was going to be world changing, I don't think that there were people that would, pull out their note paper in the saloon and they're like, you know what, I'm gonna do phone today. I'm gonna go phone today, right? These days we use terms like go live and I'm gonna do a live, but we're not talking about the content part of it. So my point in that example would be, it makes no sense to say, I'm going to go live on, or go phone or do a phone, because we know it's the method of delivery. It's the antenna. It's the tunnel to a bigger conversation. Because hopefully somebody was on the other end of that particular conversation. And so it's a situation where if we're careful about it, we can begin to tell those stories. And one of them for me that I think is probably the most recent home run is that I produced a PSA for the North Carolina Association of Fire Chiefs uh, in February, and this was a statewide ad. I do a lot within the fire service. I've been in it 20 years, and um, doing marketing and media. And they were saying, hey, the volunteers are fading away quickly. This is a national problem. And I put together a video that I really felt like spoke to the pride of North Carolina, spoke to the unity of the community, and the bigger why, the bigger reason why it's important for you to think about putting the time in to serve in your local neighborhood. Most fire stations, this one here, this was the Silver Lake Volunteer Fire Department in Wilson, North Carolina. These were all real firefighters. And I spent, 2 weekends embedded with them. And, they're just great people, men and women who've got full time jobs, daily lives, and yet they see the need to serve their community in a way that if they weren't there, there would be a bigger need in a moment of true pain. And they are healers. And so I wanted to tell their story in a way that made it clear that it wasn't only about the fire service. Like me, I'm not operational. This part of the clip talks about, you can be a social media person within your fire system. You can drive the truck even if you're not a firefighter. For me, like I said, it's marketing and media that I perform and provide for the fire system. And so there's a place for everybody. And the great news about this is the International Association of Firefighters mentioned to me that this ad has brought in over 600 people in 6 months, and that was as of 3 months ago. And it had been one of the most successful campaigns that they had seen to date. And the reason why is that I think on the inside, and when I speak in terms of the fire system,
Yep.
you think in terms of recruitment and retention, and we've got a volunteer here, and we call them members and things. But the reality is, you know what the people on the other side of that ad see? They see a greater purpose and a greater good. They see themselves fitting into a way that they can be there for their father who may have heart trouble one day. They can see themselves in a moment when there's nobody else for miles. They're the ones that show up because we all know we all want to call our grandma before we call 911. It's like it doesn't matter what it is. That's the last phone call anybody wants to make. So the lingo and the language was very different in this ad, I think, than other ads that have been done before. And I think it resonated with people. And resonate is probably the biggest word that any of us as content creators should be using, because we talk about engagement or brand value and all these other type of words. We even throw the word influencer around, but the reality is it's resonate means people in scrolling all of a sudden stop, and now they're not even just stopping. They're going to click the watch full screen, and they're going to watch enough to hear more about what does this really mean, because you now connected something internally that doesn't always happen, right? Because in a world of Times Square, if you've ever been to Times Square, there are thousands of signs. And I love New York. I love going up there and doing photo safaris, is what I call them, taking pictures of things and people. I ask people all the time, "Hey, what are the top 3, top 5 signs you remember standing here in Times Square?" Not one person can tell me all 5 or sometimes 3, but mostly they have to start looking around to remember what they've seen because there's so much digital noise right in front of them. Same thing is true on your timeline and on every platform that you're on. That discovery is the biggest problem we all have. It's not that we're not creating great things sometimes, but it's just there's so much out there. You've got to find a way to rise above the real noise that's there now.
Yeah, that's I think a challenge for everybody. And it's also something where we tend to think that likes or shares are a proxy for making that connection. And in some ways, they can be very deceptive. And these are not necessarily long term viewers. They're not going to be engaged beyond you're good enough for me to click a thumbs up, but you're not, I'm not really going to become engaged. And creating that next level of engagement, that community piece, I think is what we all need to strive
Yeah.
for in this.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're spot on with that, John. I've always said a like is a head nod. And I've never been big on trying to collect people the way, that's the big thing now. Get as many people as you can. There's certain value in that for sure, especially if you want to begin pursuing, relationships where people value that kind of thing. But for me, a like is a head nod. It's like, oh, it was okay. It was awesome. But that did not mean that, hey, I now have the ring and the marriage papers. It's going to be on the 25th in the fall.
Right.
It's not a marriage. It is, hey, that was awesome. And now if somebody follows, that's, hey, you doing some awesome stuff. I want to see more. But that's still not, a situation where you are, entering a relationship. So I think for a content creator, the biggest thing you can do that is, in my opinion, wrong, is to think that somehow you're sitting on this pyramid of people. Doesn't work that way. Everything you do has got to resonate with them every single time. It's a lot like being in the World Series or the NFL or the Super Bowl, because you're as good as your last field goal, you're as good as your last pass. And
Yep.
so you got to concentrate on consistency, because consistency is king, and putting out things that continually get people interested. And then beyond those things, I think beyond the likes and the follows, you're going to have the people come forward going, hey, you know what? I think there's I'm working on something maybe you can help me with. And that's where a great conversation starts. That if you're the right fit for somebody, you can really help tell their story in a way that maybe they couldn't. And there's incredible benefit for everybody. But I definitely agree with you that likes and follows are probably not the right way to have done this whole thing, but it's what we have, and it's the currency of the social world at the moment for sure.
Well, I want to say thank you because I know I've kept you on and we've been talking for a while now. But is there any closing thoughts you'd like to share with everybody before we sign off
Well,
today?
like I said, I always love the conversations we have. This is exactly like the conversations we have when we're not recording. And I really value what you're doing. And, for those of you who don't know, John has incredible products that help you tell the story using multiple cameras and multiple guests on a live show like this. You got to check out Neural Net if you haven't done that yet. But I would just say, if you hear something that you think might be of value and you think I can help, check out jeffandhighdef.tv. Don't be afraid to connect with me. I would love to help and learn more about what you're doing. No obligation. And if there's anything I can do to help with you, I would love to do it.
All right, Jeff, thanks a lot for joining us here. So
Glad to be here.
great. So I just want to, before we close up the show, I want to remind everybody that in 2 weeks, so it's coming up pretty fast, we're going to be talking at the Stream Geek Summit in New York. So this is going to be November 8th, Friday, November 8th. So we'll be doing this instead of our show in 2 weeks. I'll be talking at a workshop in the morning for live streaming 101, basically how to get started. And we'll probably touch on some of the things we've talked about with the conversation with Jeff today. So I definitely would love to have anybody that's, can make it to show up, just say hello. It would be good to get to put a face with some of the names I see scroll by in the comments. So thanks again to Jeff for making the time to be with us. Uh, Jeff, I'd like to, say personally, thank you very much for, joining us on the show today. This has been great.
It has been good. I look forward to talking to you again.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so for next week's show, we're going to be taking a look at working with remote guests. I think this is something that, just like we did today, where we had Jeff on, we have something now where, for a lot of people that are in production doing podcasting, video podcast, as well as streaming, the ability to bring remote guests into your productions and to create different perspectives and have different conversations than you could do sort of talking to a camera by yourself is important. But there's a lot of steps that go behind this to pull this off and make this work. So we're going to be talking about this next week. Love to have you join us. So until then, have a good one.